emphasize, I recognize that these concepts and practices that we're going to talk about today are very simplistic. I've laid out them very simplistically, and we all know that communicating with others and trying to figure out how to connect with other people is not as simple as, doing it's not A plus B equals C all the time. And we all are in various stages of improving the ways that we communicate with each other, not only with people in our personal life, but folks in our professional life. So I just want to recognize that this is simple as we move through it, but complex and not so simple when we try to implement it. But that's also why I have given the opportunity for some participation from you. You are experts in your fields. Many of you are on a team. And so I'm hoping that as we move through the presentation, we'll include your participations your experiences as you are willing to share those. And just to set the stage here, because I like to show some videos and I like humor, I have two videos I want to show you real quick here. This one doesn't have any sound, so don't worry about the fact there's no sound. Some really good communication going on there, right? And this one this is a classic. If you haven't seen this before, if it's been a little while, this one is so much fun. I hadn't watched this in a really long time. You'll recognize this dialogue. I'm not going to show it all to you. I'm going to pull it up here to about right here. And we're just going to watch this for a few minutes. Communication. This is really about communication, right?
Popcorn and don't interrupt the act anymore. Yes, sir. All right. But strange may seem they give ball players nowadays very peculiar names.
Funny names?
Nicknames, pet names.
Not as funny as my name, Sebastian Dinwiddie.
Oh, yes.
Funnier than that?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Now, on the St. Louis team, we have who's on first, what's on second, I don't know's on third.
That's what I want to find out. I want you to tell me the names of the fellas on the St. Louis team.
I'm telling you, who's on first, what's on second, I don't know's on third.
You know the fellas' names?
Yes.
Well, then who's playing first?
Yes.
I mean the fellow's name on first base.
Who?
The fellow playing first base for St. Louis.
Who?
The guy on first base.
Who is on first?
Well, what are you asking me for?
I'm not asking you, I'm telling you, who is on first?
I'm asking you who's on first.
That's the man's name.
That's whose name?
Yes.
Well, go ahead and tell me.
Who?
The guy on first.
Who?
The first baseman.
Who is on first?
Have you got a first baseman on first?
Certainly.
Then who's playing first?
Absolutely.
When you pay off the first baseman every month, who gets the money?
Every dollar of it. Why not? The man's entitled to it.
Who is?
Yes.
So who gets it?
Why shouldn't he? Sometimes his wife comes down and collects it.
Whose wife?
Yes. After all, the man earns it.
Who does?
Absolutely.
Well, all I'm trying to find out is what's the guy's name on first base?
Oh, no. What is on second base?
I'm not asking you who's on second.
Who's on first?
That's what I'm trying to find out.
Well, don't change the players.
I'm not changing nobody.
Take it easy.
What's the guy's name on first base?
What's the guy's name on second base?
I'm not asking you who's on second.
Who's on first?
I don't know.
He's on third. We're not talking about him.
How did I get on third base?
You mentioned his name.
If I mention a third baseman's name, who did I say is playing third?
No, who's playing first?
Stay off of first, will you?
Well, what do you want me to do?
Now, what's the guy's name on third base?
What's on second?
I'm not asking you who's on second.
Who's on first?
I don't know.
He's on third.
There I go, back on third again.
Well, I can't change their names.
Will you please stay on third base, Mr. Broadhurst?
Now, what is it you want to know?
What is the fella's name on third base?
What is the fella's name on second base?
I'm not asking you who's on second.
Who's on first?
I don't know. Third base. You got an outfield?
Oh, sure.
St. Louis has got a good outfield?
Absolutely.
The left fielder's name?
Why?
I don't know. I just thought I'd ask you.
Well, I just thought I'd tell you.
Then tell me who's playing left field.
Who is playing first?
Stay out of the infield.
Don't mention their names out here.
I want to know what's the fellow's name in left field.
What is on second?
I'm not asking you who's on second.
Who is on first?
I don't know.
Third base! Oh, take it easy, man.
And the left fielder's name?
Why?
Because.
Oh, he's center field. He's center. Will you pick up your hat, please? Pick up your hat and stop this.
Okay, so I don't know how many of you have been in a team meeting or staffing and have experienced that level of frustration, or if you just generally have an experience of being in a conversation like that, where one of you is kind of, going on this track and the other of you is going on this track, and you can't seem to figure out how to make your tracks connect. It can be a very frustrating experience. We're all unique individuals, right? We're all unique, and we all come with our own identities, experiences, ways that we connect with each other. And sometimes it's harder to connect with some people than it is with others, although the effort is always worth it. What I want to do now, this is my audience participation part. I'd really like to hear from you. If you would be willing to answer one or all of these questions in chat, please. I would like to hear from you, one, an example of poor team communication you've either experienced or witnessed, and tell us why you think it was bad. Two, give an example of great team communication you experienced or witnessed and say why it was great. Or three, what are your personal communication strategies in team meetings? You can answer all of these or just pick one. Don't worry, I'm not going to go too fast. So I'm going to give you plenty of time to put your answers in the chat. I'm not going to rush you, so you've got time to think about this and respond. But I'd love to hear from you, because many of you are on teams, and I know that you have experienced these things before. And Tina was actually able to just pull up chat so I can see the chat box. Thank you, Lynn. We see you. All right, we've got some coming in. I'm gonna wait just a few more for a little bit longer to get some more responses before we start talking about them. If you missed it, we are talking about examples of poor team communication we've either experienced or witnessed. Examples of great team communication we've either experienced or witnessed. And if you have any personal communication strategies that you use with your team that you feel work for you. I'm going to wait another, say, 20 to 30 seconds. Okay, I see some great responses here. So Trish says, good communication example. open dialogue, humility, asking clarifying questions, giving everyone a safe space. That safe space, I think, is really vital to share, and everyone being willing to share from their own area of expertise. Absolutely. Patty, hi, Patty. Patty says poor communication when certain team members are having individual conversations and not really paying full attention. I don't know how many times. So I've been going around doing technical assistance and training with teams since 2016 at this point. So I've seen a lot of teams. And one of the things I see a lot is sidebar conversation, right? Sidebar conversation. And often it's the same people that have this sidebar conversation, and the team kind of starts getting fed up because they're always, nobody's trusting what the conversation's about, or trusting that they know what the rest of everybody else is saying. Unclear about what's really going on. That's right. Yep. Corey, hi, Corey. Accessible, poor, not everyone having the backstory or all the information for various reasons. Absolutely. Scott, poor team communication. We had asked our team not to release soon-to-be participants from jail on Fridays. We feel this often sets the participant up for a potentially difficult weekend. Still, I suppose, in an effort to move a participant along with good intentions, we still run into this occasionally. So, like, not everybody being on the same page or understanding why that decision or why that request is being made. Which says poor communication, individuals with frustrations that they bottle up and make snarky comments during treatment team meetings. Yes, the passive aggressive comments. Those are always really fun. Patty says, I like to call on team members individually for input, thoughts, or suggestions if everyone is being really quiet. Yes, absolutely. One of the things I learned personally is that the quiet people it's not that they don't necessarily have an opinion or something to say. Sometimes a quiet person, it's just in their nature to be that way. But if you ask them, they might have something really, really important and quite profound or insightful to say. So getting everybody's feedback is really important because you might miss something because of a personality. Angie, hi, Angie. Poor communication. An attorney I was speaking with would not allow me to finish sentences, statements. He continued to cut me off. Yeah, that's always fun when somebody treats you like you don't know what you're doing or what you're talking about, or that what they have to say is more important than you. Tina, hi, Tina. For our team, we have a staff meeting with our company staff, and we bring it to the team, and it seems to help keep everyone on the same page. Okay, so this is like something that you guys do. You have a staff meeting with everybody, and then you bring it to the team, and everybody, when you have those conversations, everybody kind of understands and is singing from the same, sheet, basically, right? Communication from Connie, no one interrupts each other and they're respectful. Corey says a good example is folks using active listening, asking for clarification, having the packet beforehand is great. Again, having the information you need to help make decisions and to keep the staffing going, right? No one likes a 3-hour staff meeting. I don't know, maybe some people like a 3-hour staff meeting. Most people, I would say, do not like a 3-hour staff meeting. Someone shared to me, poor communication, people on their phones are not being fully present. Corey says he likes to use reflective listening. Sharita, hi, Sharita. Poor communication, the person leading assumes everyone is up to date on something they're communicating, and it leads to confusion, misunderstanding, and a challenge to know next steps. This happens a lot. When you don't have really good, and it happens when you have a new team too. I want to say that as you're trying to figure out the best ways to communicate with each other, is figuring out those policies and procedures for team members that are going to help everyone be on the same page and not take up so much time in staffing, trying to catch everybody up when you get there, right? Mary says, great communication is once a month our team meets to discuss what each program is doing and or different things going on with our company and any issues. And it's great because we all get a chance to share our ideas and get to know what others are doing with their programs. This meeting is called Meeting of the Minds. Oh, I love that. That is awesome. Meeting of the Minds. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of this concept right here later on in the presentation too. Keisha, hi Keisha, poor communication, people on their phones and not being fully present. Yep, we saw that one. No eye contact. Yeah, body language says a lot, doesn't it? Communication, direct eye contact, listening until speaker has completed their thoughts, providing reflection and paraphrasing. I mean, these are all, this is just a great example of how you're professionals, you work in a professional setting, and what works for you and what doesn't, and what works to build rapport and trust on a team and what doesn't. I do think it is hard sometimes for us to consider that there might be those things that we're not aware of that we're doing ourselves too, that may lead to people being frustrated or unable to connect with us. And I really, while it's very easy to point out the things that other folks are doing on our team, I do hope that everyone takes the opportunity to do some self-reflection and to do some self-analysis as we talk through these things to see if there are ways that you can improve your communication. As we'll talk about a little later on, when we're able to bring better communication ourselves to our team and model that behavior, it can help the team also improve their communication dynamics. I do know that there is no, especially when you have a lot of broken communication on a team, there is no easy fix, but I do believe that working on our own communication can help others see how they're supposed to communicate. All right, so I appreciate all that. That was fantastic. And you are going to hear some of these things as we move forward. So I had an opportunity to read a really great book called Super Communicators: How to Unlock the Secret Language of Connection. And Charles Duhigg, who's a Pulitzer Prize winner, he says that in order to have effective communication, everyone needs to be having the same kind of conversation at the same time to connect. And one of the stories in his book, if you happen to decide you want to pick it up and look at it, he uses all kinds of data, research, studies to back up his premises. And he also shares lots of really interesting stories from like the corporate world, like Netflix, to working with astronauts at NASA, all kinds of really interesting stories to demonstrate kind of communication gone wrong and how to make communication go right. So a lot of the stories that he presents in his book are about things that were not happening really well and how improving communication and connection with people that we work with helped to fix and solve a problem. And so one of the really interesting studies that he talked about was with musicians. I don't know how many folks here are musicians, and I can't see your faces, but if you are a musician, would you like come off mute and tell us what you play, or if you sing or whatever, or you can drop it in chat too, but I'm interested to know if there are any musicians in the room. Any? No? No one plays an instrument? We got a singer? No singers? Okay, like I said, I can't see faces, so I can't tell if somebody's trying to talk or what. That's really interesting if nobody, well, that's cool. So hopefully you'll get this. So he said that in Germany in 2012, a research institute basically took guitarists and they studied the brains of guitarists playing a sonata. Is this I haven't played since high school. What did you play, Patty? Oh, Connie plays piano and guitar. Okay, so we do have some musicians in here. All right, excellent. So they were looking at the brains of these guitarists, and when they were focusing on their own music, their brain activity didn't look anything alike. But when they started pairing these guitarists together and playing them, having them play with each other, the electrical impulses in their brains began to synchronize. The researchers said it looked like the musicians' minds had merged. It was so synchronized. They also even noticed the synchronicity in their heartbeat, in eye dilation, in their breathing. And so they went and took that same study and they looked at communication and how communication may do the same thing, looking at brainwaves. And so they looked at people listening to a person sharing a story. An example was of a prom date gone wrong. And the listeners' bodies began to synchronize with the speaker. And the more that the listeners identified with what the speaker was saying, the more synchronized their brain waves and these other physical notations synchronized, right? And the listeners that did synchronize more also reported really empathizing and understanding the perspective of the speaker. Also found with groups of people who showed no neural synchronicity with each other that after a conversation in a group setting where they had a specific topic to discuss and they, kind of asked questions and really dived into the conversation, that they began to seeing synchronicity in the brainwaves of those individuals that had those conversations. And so what really came out of the studies was, in order to communicate, you really have to find connection with other people. Effective communication is simply about, even though it's not necessarily super simple, is simply about connecting, communicating and connecting. One of the things I think is really interesting about this is we in our field know that one of the foundational concepts of a healthy recovery is connection with other human beings, right? So I think it's interesting that we're now talking about, in terms of communicating effectively, we're talking about connecting with each other. And it may seem perhaps counter to a professional environment to think about, really connecting with your peers. But essentially, that's what he's saying is, while in the past, maybe we're supposed to leave our personalities and our personal issues and our emotions and all that stuff outside, when you are trying to have effective communication with another person, it has to come with connecting with that person. And we'll talk a little bit more here in a minute about why that is. So he says basically that there are 3 conversations that you're having at any given time. And that is, what is this all about? Okay. We're making some decisions, we're problem solving, and this is something that teams are doing a lot of, right? We are trying to figure out, when we're in our team environment, how to respond to a participant's behavior, to sanction them or incentivize them or whatever. So we're focused a lot of times in team on, what are we here to get done, right? The second conversation that we have is, how do we feel, right? Obviously, it's about a person and how they're feeling, and when they're talking about having, a concern or having an argument, like in staffing, this could come up when a participant is going through a time. A participant breaks the rule, and there might be some frustration because you've worked so hard as a team, and they're not getting it for whatever reason. If you've been on a team for any length of time, you've experienced this. And so sometimes the conversation may move to, how do we feel? The third question is, who are we? And this question is really about us in relation to other people. So what we do for a living, our beliefs, our politics, our religious beliefs, our backgrounds, our social identities, and how those come into play during our conversations with other people. And on a team, recovery court, mental health court, etc. team, everyone on that team is coming from a different background, right? So you are inevitably at any point in a conversation on that team, you are in a who are we conversation because you're coming from these different places, right? So all these conversational paradigms, they use different parts of your brain. So there's actually a physical transition between having the what's this really about conversation, who are we conversation, and how do we feel conversation. And what Duhigg says that we do with this information when we are attempting to effectively communicate with a human being is that we match the other person. Communication requires that we identify which one of those three conversations we're having. Who are we? How do we feel? Why are we here? And then we match the conversation and the energy of the person we're trying to effectively communicate with. In the past, I think there was conversation instruction in the professional world that was really intended to be more manipulative, perhaps. How do you get somebody to agree with you or to win an argument kind of thing? This is not what he is saying. In fact, he's saying the exact opposite. When you're matching the person in their conversation and in their energy, you have to be authentic about it. You have to come with some vulnerability and ask lots of questions so that you can get a deeper clarification about where they're coming from. And when you are able to match them in a genuine way with some vulnerability, they are going to hear you and they're going to observe that you are making that effort to get with them, get on the same page as them. And that is going to build rapport, and that is going to improve your communication with them. Okay. I do see that some other folks actually responded to my musician question. I knew we had some of you out there. Okay, so this is how my little simple little examples of team members and things that I've heard folks on teams saying in the past. So the recovery court coordinator is saying, we need to decide what to do about Brad. I'm not going to tell you I was thinking about a Brad when I thought this up too, but I'm not going to tell you which Brad it is. This is his third infraction for this specific rule, and we keep ending up in the same place with him. Treatment providers like, I'm finding this whole conversation very frustrating and pointless, and it's obvious we aren't going to agree, so someone just decide and let's get it done, okay? The district attorney's like, you know what? If people on this team stop showing up with their own agendas, we might be able to get somewhere. Unfortunately, I've got a job to do, and I have to be steadfast about that. So I've explained my viewpoint already. So each of these folks, you can, perhaps these are very simplistic, but you can imagine the team conversation that's happening in this situation, I imagine. And how, because each of these three people are having a different conversation, right? The coordinator is having which conversation? Come off mute, tell me in chat, whatever. The coordinator is having which conversation, do you think? Anybody? All right, he's having the what's this all about conversation. What is this really about? He is in the problem solving mode. Treatment provider is having, anybody want to take a guess? Treatment providers are having how do we feel about this? Yeah, that's right, Patty. Thank you. How do we feel about this? I'm feeling pretty frustrated and like beating my head against the wall here, right? And the district attorney is having which conversation? There's only one left, right? I made it pretty easy. Who are we? The district attorney is having a who are we? This is from my perspective, from my point of view, right, I recognize that people are showing up with their own things that they've got going on, but I have my own thing too. And, I'm not going to move off of that. And so we've got 3 conversations here, and you can imagine how staffing is going to go if these 3 people continue to maintain their own conversation, right? We're not going to get anywhere. So what Duhigg says is when somebody's in this, what is this really about? This is really a negotiation point, right? You move into match the coordinator as he's talking about Brad, and you identify, okay, the coordinator is in this mode to actually try to problem solve and figure out how we can make these choices together. What does he want? How do I find out what he wants? I find out what he wants by asking him some questions, and asking him some questions on top of the questions so that I really get an understanding about where he's coming from. As I'm doing that, he is going to recognize what I'm doing, even though he might not say, oh, Maria's trying to have a what is this really about conversation with me. But by the very nature of exploring his desires to negotiate and come to a decision about Brad, you are demonstrating to him that what he is saying is relevant and important to you, and you are really trying to get at the heart of the matter. In the how do we really feel, right? Every discussion, to an extent, is a how do we feel discussion. You think about the most interesting conversation you've ever had in your life, but it's safe to say that those conversations had some sort of personal, emotional, vulnerable content, right? Ones where you and the other person may be being vulnerable. It doesn't have to be somebody's crying or yelling or screaming, or I'm not necessarily talking about that kind of emotion, but the vulnerability, the genuineness of being human. In those kind of conversations, what's interesting, what researchers have really noticed is that in those kind of conversations, nobody has to teach you how to listen really well. When we're hearing personal information about somebody who's being vulnerable, we're automatically better listeners. Nobody has to teach us how to do that. Isn't that interesting? Anyway, so matching the treatment provider means to move into a more vulnerable, emotional conversation, asking questions, being vulnerable back by sharing your own feelings about the situation while also listening. To pay a lot of attention to what's being said, but not necessarily what's being said out loud, right? So, the undercurrent communication that's happening, all of that is, again, going to demonstrate to that person that you're making that effort. There is a really common, the idea of active listening, which is about, listening to another person, attempting to put yourself in their shoes and then rephrasing back to them what we heard them say. This is like counseling 101. And so that is another kind of piece to, the how do we feel when a person gets that you are recognizing and understanding their frustration or their concern or their anxiety or whatever, and that you are also being vulnerable back to them, then they're going to see that you respect what they're saying and that you value what they're saying, and you are going to move into a deeper, more authentic, effective communication with that person. Who we are, when we bring ourselves to the table, that's who we are. And that also is going to be a lot of conversations we have, right? Because our beliefs, our experiences, our backgrounds, our social identities, these all shape how we hear other people and how we speak to other people. Duhigg says that this is important to acknowledge. These differences are important to acknowledge because you don't want to let those kinds of things necessarily derail your communication or derail you from having a more effective communication with a person by moving into this us versus them mentality. This is something that we all can relate to right now in our political dynamic we've got going on in the country and in the world. Is it's so easy for folks to see people and perhaps for us to even move into an us versus them mentality. And because human beings innately want to connect and belong to each other or belong to something, have some sort of belonging, because we are prone to do that ourselves, it's also easy for us to really move to a stereotype of people who are not in the group that we belong to. And in stereotyping other people, we automatically make those groups more one-dimensional. An example, a terrible example is lawyers, right? From your team. Of all your team members on your team, lawyers are the ones that have the most jokes about them, right? Lawyers are the ones that, have awful jokes told about them. And so if we come into the environment with that mentality that lawyers are all whatever, we move them into this one-dimensional space where they're no longer like fully formed people in our minds. And it becomes easier and easier to stereotype them, to not respect what they say when they're talking, and all of these other things kind of, cascade down. This is why it's easy to see when we're in a who are we kind of conversation, because these identities that we either form about others or that we also have about ourselves really they reflect everything that we talk about, really. The other interesting thing that Hig brought up, and he talked about some studies, is about the stereotype and stereotype threat. Stereotype threat is when a stereotype influences your behavior. And they looked at two different studies. They looked at studies of women. They had women take math tests. And in the math tests, women stereotypically don't do as well as men in math, right? And so what they found, especially when they acknowledged this before the testing, is that the women that were in the testing, they didn't do as well as their male counterparts. Here's what they did though. They went back and they had a group of women take the test, but before taking the test, they had the women that were about to take the test explore themselves, the different ways that they identify themselves. What groups do they identify themselves? What are their social identities? What are the things that make up them? They actually had them kind of chart all of the different components and aspects of their lives to reflect just how diverse and full of a human being they were. And when those folks took the same test, there were no differences between the scores of the men and the women. They also did this with people of color and intelligence testing, because there's in the past been a stereotype that people of color are not going to do as well on these tests. They did the same exact thing where they took a group of folks of color and they did this mapping out where they were reminding themselves of their diversity and the breadth and depth of themselves. And the focus was not so much on the stereotype, and the same thing happened, right? So the stereotype threat, what it acknowledges is the stereotype threat for ourselves is also very real and can influence how we interact with others in our life. And that's important for me to recognize for myself, and important for others to recognize too, that we're not necessarily in the same place at the same time. We're not necessarily coming from the same background. And that doesn't mean that your background's any worse or better than mine, but it does mean that there's differences. And we need to be able to acknowledge those in order to have effective conversations. And those effective conversations are going to happen when we do begin to move away from stereotyping ourselves and other people and exploring the multifaceted nature of the people that we work with. Draw out the dimensions of other people by asking questions, finding where there's common ground, finding where there's equal common ground. Okay. And in doing that, you will also begin to create your own group. So teams that I have witnessed that work really well together are the groups, the teams that have spent time outside of staffing. You know, they do retreats. You know, they go have lunch together. They make an effort to get to know each other outside of the staffing room. And by getting to know each other and being able to find ways that they identify with each other outside of the office helps them more effectively communicate with each other. We also, in talking about who are we, right? We can't forget that our team roles also include ethics and responsibilities that are not necessarily the same depending on what role that you come from, right? So for treatment, if I'm a new person on the team and I do not understand the foundational importance of confidentiality from the treatment perspective, I am going to be a frustrated person. If I don't understand that the public defender brings into the team role still the ability for client attorney privilege, and that public defender may have information that they cannot share in staffing, and they may even have that information, they may be trying to get the participant to share on their own because that really is best, but it might take weeks. And then you find out, oh, you've known for 3 weeks that this happened and you didn't say anything. That might be pretty frustrating if you don't understand that that's a vital foundational piece of a public defender's job. We have to be able to understand, you know, each other's roles and why we're doing the things that we're doing, why we are not doing some of the things that we're not doing, and respect that those are foundational to our roles in order to also be able to effectively communicate with each other. The reason the team works is because you're not all from the same role. You all bring your own expertise. Obviously, you all bring your own expertise, and the value of the team in and of itself is because of that. If it was a team of treatment providers only, it's not going to be as effective as if it's the team that you have now. And we've heard the data and the statistics around having all of these roles on the team actively engaged and how it improves our program outcomes, right? Okay, so kind of to keep talking about his ideas, Duhigg's ideas, but also to kind of wrap up, we can move into talking a little bit more about best practices and the procedural fairness that I want to talk about. He says that there's sort of 4 rules to a learning conversation. The first rule is to pay attention to what kind of conversation is happening. And I do think, you know, when I was reading the book and I was thinking about this, I do think that takes probably practice, right? And I also think that you can probably have multiple conversations at the same time. Like if you're in a team dynamic, that's a lot of moving parts, right? Try to keep track of if everybody's on different conversations, and I've got to make a decision about whose conversation I want to try to match, right? And finesse that so that we can have effective communication. I do think that probably takes some time and practice and patience to learn how to do effectively. The second rule is to share your goals and ask what other people, what their goals are. You know, if you don't talk about those things, then people don't know. You can't, I mean, how often do we assume that other people know things? I do it all the time. I always make assumptions about, thinking, oh, I've said this 1,000 times, so, they know that, but that isn't necessarily true. And so making assumptions, well, we won't, I mean, everybody knows what that means, right? Oh, okay. I think I only make myself laugh. Rule 3, ask about others' feelings and share your own. It is okay in the professional world to talk about feelings. I don't mean that you air all your dirty laundry. That is not what I'm trying to say. But I do think because we are feeling people, that's, we have emotion, that to ignore that and not address it when it comes up is to be more one-dimensional to the people that we're trying to effectively communicate with. It also is not being authentic. If I want to be authentic with you, then I have to acknowledge when my feelings come up and we need to talk about them. And that happens in teams too. You are going to have feelings about stuff that's going on. What if you've made a decision about a participant to do a certain thing related to their behavior, and 2 weeks from then that person, absconds, relapses, whatever, and you come back and you're thinking to yourself, I didn't want to do that anyway. That was not my suggestion. We didn't go with my suggestion though. We went with somebody else's suggestion and look what happened. Right? I mean, this happens a lot, and we need to be able to talk about those without blaming or shaming, but acknowledging, that they're there. Anyway, fourth rule is to explore if identities are important to the discussion. So if we are talking about something that maybe is about the ethics or responsibilities of my role, we need to have those conversations. If we are aware that our participants has, that some of our conflict or frustration or lack of just being really solid about what to do is about our participants' social identities in some way, shape, or form. Acknowledging that. We have to be willing to talk about those things as well. Those are his 4 rules for his learning conversation. What I think is really interesting when I read Duhigg's book, and also being familiar with the best practices and procedural fairness theories, is that the concepts are all the same at their core. Adult drug court best practices talk about team communication and sharing information with each other. Studies use something in the best practices, which the first 5 are revised and are out, and the last 5 are coming out. I imagine that they're going to have them for their May conference in Anaheim, because they're not out yet. But the best practices talks about the Network for the Improvement of Addiction Treatment, or NITEX, and this comes out of the behavioral health field. And one of the core principles of this model is to create psychological safety among teams. Does anybody want to come off mute or put in chat what psychological safety means? Psychological safety, what do you think that means?
Marie, I think for me, it means that it's a space where I can share and I don't have to worry about it being used against me in the future.
That's beautiful. Yeah, absolutely. Does anybody else have a different take? Okay. I definitely think if you think about times when you did not feel psychologically safe, I know I have a work environment experience where I really felt like the person that was in charge of our office had lots of negative views about certain types of people. and I was that certain type of person. And so I always felt like they did not, respect or value what I said. And it made me not want to say anything at all. And I did. I mean, and imagine that, me not saying anything. But in that space, I didn't feel safe to do that. I felt like it was going to come back to get me. Sorry, I keep touching my mouth and I need to leave it alone. But studies have found a number of positive outcomes. There have been over a dozen drug courts that have used this NITEX model. And what has been interesting coming out of that is that it not only has improved team communication, but it has improved program outcomes like, just efficiencies in the program, higher admission rates, shorter wait times to go into treatment, reducing no-shows to supervision and treatment sessions. So just improving team communication has also improved those programs. It's really incredible when you think about it. We take for granted, I think sometimes, the value of being able to have good communication with our peers. And these right here, I pulled these right out of the best practices manual, book, publication, whatever. And while I don't necessarily like to read my slides, I do think that if we think about what we just talked about with Duhigg's concepts and what we're going to talk about here with procedural fairness in a minute, and the things that you guys talked about when we started at the beginning of the presentation, talking about ways that you've seen poor communication, ways that you've seen effective communication, and your own personal strategies, you're going to see these things reflected in all of that. And I think it's just useful to be here a minute and to think about these in this way. So I'm going to read them. There's 9 of them here. There is a 10th, and it's about the judge. But since we weren't really focusing on the judge specifically, I didn't include that one. Okay. But here's the 9 that I've got in here. So focusing statements on substantive issues rather than trying to win. This one I need to have on my mirror in my bathroom. Because my mom and my husband both tell me that I like to be right. Number 2, ensure that all team members, regardless of status or authority, have an equal opportunity to speak. Number 3, hearing all aspects of team member statements before thinking about or forming a response. A couple of you talked about, making sure everybody has an opportunity to speak and that everybody's opinions or, are considered and valued, right? 4, expressing appreciation for a team member's input before making counter arguments or changing the subject. Respect that they have something to say and don't just move on from it because you don't agree. And acknowledge that you value what they have to say, even though you're not going to agree. You don't have to agree in order to have good communication and respect each other. My papa, my dad's dad, used to always say, you can disagree without being disagreeable. And I've always thought that was such a great way to just, think about respecting other people, even when you're annoyed, frustrated, and maybe even don't like them. Where are we? Number 5, acknowledge areas of agreement among team members before making counter arguments. 6, reframe statements neutrally by restating in a positive manner something without adding the anger or frustration that you might feel. This is a great technique in conflict for sure. Number 7, ensure all team members weigh in. We talked about that, and that they provide their expertise and experience. Number 8, restate others' positions to demonstrate accurate understanding. That looping to understand thing that Duhigg was talking about, and that if you've been in a counseling program, you have had to learn, is that one right there, number 8. And 9, empathetic listening, putting yourself as best as possible. I mean, it's not possible to completely know what another person has gone through, but to the best of your ability and effort to imagine what it must be like to be in another person's perspective, shoes, point of view, I do think helps us to think of them more humanly. I think about this when Gray and I have talked about bullies, for example, at school, right? A lot of times people who bully you at school have been bullied, right? And that's how they've learned how to interact, or that's how they've learned to help themselves feel better, is to turn around and bully you. And while their behavior is not appropriate and it should not be acceptable, it does help us to remember that bullies are still human beings with their own problems, right? Okay. This is just me kind of mirroring these things for 3 of the best practices we just talked about. So I'm just driving this interrelatedness together, right? This focusing statements on the substantive issue at hand rather than attempting to be right or win is really about what's this really about. The first conversation that Duhigg talks about. Expressing appreciation for a team member's input before moving on. You can put this in the how do we feel, and ensuring that all team members, regardless of who they are, have an equal opportunity to speak is really in the who we are conversation. So if you go back, which I won't right now, but if you were to go back and look at the 9 best practices, you could put them fairly squarely in one of these 3 conversations. Okay. Just checking the chat here for a second. So procedural fairness is a theory coming out of the justice system about court case processing. You'll see it kind of, if you have delved into the whole procedural fairness, or otherwise known as procedural jurisprudence, you'll see different principles or tenets used, like when you see mine, they may not look exactly like what you might see, because as more people have talked about and studied procedural fairness, people have come up with their own kind of building blocks for it. But these 4 are the ones that when I was doing my dissertation and diving into what procedural fairness was and how it can be applied in recovery courts, these were the 4 that I learned about, and that were probably the foundation, or the first 4 in the studies and in the theories of procedural fairness. Recovery courts that have been studied have used procedural fairness have demonstrated better program outcomes, better participant satisfaction when they do exit interviews with participants, because of these concepts being applied to justice. They've also started to be applied to like organizational policies and procedures, looking at organizations and how they might also mirror these principles in how they interact with employees, their policies and procedures about dealing with employees, etc. And that's why, between it being a justice-related theory and it being also applied to organizations and employee policies and procedures, it makes sense that it can really apply to how we think about our own communication on our team and about our team dynamics and overall team communication. It also, as you will see when we're talking about them, it also mirrors the adult drug court best practices for team communication, and it mirrors Duhigg's material from his Super Communicators book. The first principle is a voice. And that's basically everybody gets to tell their side of the story. From a court processing or participant standpoint, that really is about the participant, offender, whatever word you want to use in whatever situation. that they get to tell their side of the story, no matter what the outcome of the case is, no matter what the recovery court team or the judge decides to do about the person's behavior. It is valuable to that person for a chance to tell their side of the story. And that also applies to us. We like to be heard. We like to make our point. We like to know that people, respect us and pay attention to it, even if the team moves on and does not do what I'm suggesting. If they entertained it and talked about it and recognized it, there's value to me, and I'm more likely to move forward with consensus if you've at least heard me out. The second one's respect. Everyone is treated with dignity and respect. I feel like in this day and age, as professionals, if you don't know how to treat somebody with dignity and respect, you need to be in middle school, because there is no reason at all to bring anything other than respectfulness to your peers. Nobody deserves to be, disrespected in the work environment. I do think sometimes people misunderstand where a person's coming from, and they might see that as disrespect when it's not. But if you've got people in your environment that are actually talking down to others, being disrespectful, minimizing your value, those are all just really middle school behaviors, right? And not appropriate for a recovery court team at all. Preaching to the choir, I know. Neutrality, decisions are unbiased and guided by transparent reasoning. So, all opinions are considered. How decisions are made are, nobody is getting, I guess, more of the value than others. If you've ever been on a team where there's one person who is more outspoken and their idea is always the one that everybody agrees with, now it could be that they are more savvy and they've been doing it longer, but it also could be that there's favoritism, right? And that also kind of breaks a team when that happens. And so, neutrality really is about, making sure that everybody has a say, and that also whatever decisions we make as a team, it's really clear why we are making those decisions. And for those of you that have seen that staffing sheet that the Treatment Court Institute often uses in their materials, it's really great because it helps guide that transparent conversation and reasoning practice by really focusing on the why are we here conversation that needs to happen to make a decision about participants and their behavior, right? And then trustworthiness. I would say if you asked me, and if you asked the faculty that I've worked with since 2016 all over the country, trustworthiness on the team is one of the biggest reasons a team is broken. Is not listening to each other, not valuing, thinking that there are agendas, there actually being agendas, thinking that somebody doesn't know what they're talking about. A lot of times this is from a court versus a treatment perspective, especially on new teams where they still don't really understand those roles and ethics and responsibilities and the dynamics there, and they don't understand why they can't get on the same page. We see that a lot. Not being able to trust that when the treatment provider says, I've given you all the information you need to know for us to make a decision, that you trust that that's true. Those kinds of things can really, and it takes, communicating, getting to know each other and all of those things to be able to really trust each other. Those are the 4 principles. Looking at my time, I'm still good. Okay, so this is just me kind of showing you how the procedural fairness, 4 basic tenets, principles, whatever you want to call them, relates to the best practices and relates to what Duhigg was saying, right? Because voice, and I really just kind of covered some of this, so I don't know that I need to necessarily cover it, except to say a couple of things. Like, voice when you're frustrated, you feel like people aren't listening. You can shift your focus to listening to them instead of trying to convince them to listen to you. And that might help, move forward in the conversation. Respect. I'll tell you what, we all know that our participants are very savvy. They know when you are not being authentic. They know when you're not being authentic to them, and they know when you're not being authentic to each other too. So if you've got team issues, your participants know it. They watch how you interact with each other. They know who's buddies and they know who's not buddies. I mean, flat out, they do. Your body language is going to show people respect just as much as the things that come out of your mouth. If you are talking on your phone, if you are constantly on your phone in staffing, if you are not making any eye contact, if you're talking over people, like what we talked about earlier, if you're having sidebar conversations, I mean, I know I've been in sidebar conversations and I've been aware of how that could be perceived. And it has made me comfortable thinking about how that could be perceived. And sometimes we think our sidebar conversations, that there's a lot of value in them. But especially if you have new people, you don't have complete trust in your team, those kinds of things, you do not want to have sidebar conversations. You want to make sure that conversations are transparent, are in front of everybody, because everybody needs to know what's going on, and everybody needs to know that there's not any kind of playing on the outside, so to speak. An effectively communicating team, and one that's been around a while and they trust each other and all that stuff, it might be okay to have some sidebar conversations and everybody knows that, you're just trying to figure something out. But if you're not in that place, don't have them, and put your phone down. Neutrality, perhaps you don't understand why a team member is suggesting something, why the team is frequently going with this person's suggestion over another person's suggestion. You can create an atmosphere of more neutrality by asking questions and asking for clarification to understand. There might be a more quiet person on the team that is thinking the same thing. And so you may be able to ask the questions to help more than just yourself understand what's happening. It also provides an opportunity to maybe do some calling out if in fact there's any kind of shadiness happening you may or may not be aware of, right? And then I already talked about the trustworthiness thing. That's really big. And I really believe that, here's what I believe. I believe that getting to know each other helps, and that sometimes that lack of trust is about just not understanding where everybody's point of view is and where everybody's coming from and what everybody's roles are supposed to be. It is sometimes also because there's a person on your team that's not trustworthy. And I recognize that too. There's that elephant on the table kind of thing in that situation, right? How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? That's not an easy fix. If you actually do have somebody on the team and they have a relationship with a person on the team that helps them stay there or whatever, those dynamics can be very, very difficult, because really in those situations, that person either has to become trustworthy, which means confrontation, or that person has to be gone. And sometimes you're not the person that gets to make that decision, right? And I understand those are frustrating positions. So to wrap up, I am doing good on them. So to wrap up, here are the things that you can take back home and apply. So I suggest that you can go back and suggest team agreements on communication when you're talking to each other. You can even say it's best practice to have agreements, like the team have agreements on how you communicate with each other, because it's a best practice to do that. But if you are in a position where your team needs to improve their communication, this is something that you can suggest and do as a team. You can model the behavior. You can be transparent with your team members and say, I am trying to improve my communication because I know that I'm not perfect. I realize that not everybody's perfect, but I know I'm not perfect. And I'm going to be practicing the things that I have been taught. And so you're going to see me practicing that. And I just want you to know. And just by acknowledging that that's happening, they may even pay attention to what you're doing. And you can model that behavior for others. This presentation is being recorded. You can suggest that you have a team lunch and learn, grab lunch and come early, grab dinner and come early whenever your staffing is, and let's watch this and have some dialogue about it and see if there are any things that we can do to improve as a team, and implement. So you can do that. And some of the most effective things that I've talked about already is to spend time outside of the office and do a retreat. Do something that it isn't in staffing that you're always having to be in the, let's get this work done. I've seen teams that did too much socializing everywhere, and that creates a 3-hour staffing. And most people do not want a 3-hour staffing. And when you have a new team member come in and you're the only one that, doesn't know everybody, that can also be really frustrating, and it can put you in a bad spot as a team. So anyway, also my last thought, and we'll go to questions and thoughts, is just remember that what you focus on grows. So if you focus on all the negative things that you and your team are doing, those are going to be really paramount in your mind. If you focus on and acknowledge, even like outright verbally acknowledge to your team the things that you're doing well, and the things that you personally are doing well, the things that you focus on will grow, and you may be a catalyst for improving the communication on your team. And that's it. We got a few more minutes for questions or anything like that. If somebody has any thoughts about what we just talked about, or actually, hold on, I want to see your faces. Let me get out here. There we go. Faces that I can see. If anybody has any thoughts or comments or whatever, oh, it's 12:15 already. So my timer said I had maybe 5 minutes left, but I guess I wasn't taking into consideration that I didn't start exactly at 11.
Hey, Marie, can you send me the PowerPoint presentation?
Yeah, I'll give it to Tina, and Tina can send it to everybody. But I'll happily send it to you, Dr. Hoff.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. I loved seeing all your faces. I'm here for a few minutes if you do want to chat, have a conversation, any of that.
I just want to say thank you, because I think communication, especially on our team, we've all known each other mostly for a long time. And specifically, it's hard to train new people when they come in, that attorneys have a role that's a little different than ours. And it's something that I have to keep reiterating because of tensions that it causes. So I think this training is going to be really good to share with our entire team, so that it can maybe open up that avenue of communication so we can all get on the same page.
Good. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Carla. It's good to see your face. Somebody has a new foster puppy. Oh, 2. Sarita, it's good to see you. Hope things are going well over there in Clarksville. That's awesome. Tina, I don't know if you know, Tina lives in Clarksville too.
She came over last week. We met.
Okay, that's wonderful. Excellent.
I really love the mental health courts.
Well, I don't see anybody wanting to talk about it, Tina. Looks like they're ready to move on.
I'd like to borrow that book, Marie, if you still have it.
So I have the Kindle version.
Oh, okay.
I might be able to share that with you on Kindle. I don't know if I can do that or not, but I do have the Kindle version.
Maybe I'll get the Audible
It's
version.
really interesting. The stories are really interesting. I mean, he like pulls no punches because some of these stories, these corporate stories and the astronaut stories, they're like pretty laundry kind of things. You know, like these corporations, I'm sure don't necessarily love that he's talking about this, but this is part of his job was to come in and do this, or you know, he interviewed people because he was a journalist forever too. And so they're really interesting stories. They're very applicable. If I can, I will share it with you on Kindle.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for coming by and spending lunch with us. As Marie said, I will go ahead and send out the slides, and the YouTube video will be uploaded. And of course, you can view it there, share it with your team. Thanks, y'all.
Bye. So Tina, I'll right now, I will send it over to you. Okay. So you can share it with everybody.
Perfect. And I'll go ahead and get the video uploaded, and I'll send both out together.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Of course, anytime. Thank you
All
so
right. It's
much.
good to see you too.
Good to see you too.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.